Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We turn in the Johnson edition to poem number 458, Like Eyes That Looked on Wastes. We're going to pay attention right away to this like so construction in this poem. Now guys, many argue this is another Sue poem. That is to say, in some ways we're back to poem 299, Your Riches Taught Me Poverty, and 452, The Malay Took the Pearl. You'll remember that we said in our study of those earlier poems that Emily has a very close relationship with Sue, who ends up becoming the wife of her brother Austin. And that relationship that she had with Sue clearly became strained in some way. And many of the poems that we study that Emily wrote, we often believe had something to do with Emily's trying to figure out what it means to love someone that you cannot possess in any physical way, and then ultimately maybe even in an emotive way, and then you've got to watch somebody else enjoy that someone. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments where we talked about some of the dynamics between Sue as well as her brother Austin. And as well, I'm hopeful that you've already read our preceding 457 poems. We just finished with 457, Sweet Safe Houses. Why? Because then you can set this poem with all those other poems that in some way often will discuss love and the hopelessness of love, or the despair of love. She'll call it here a company of misery. And the way in which love for Emily can be both fearful as well as joy-filled at the same time. Let's enjoy this poem. Like eyes that looked on wastes, incredulous of aught but blank, and steady wilderness, diversified by night, just infinites of naught. As far as it could see, so looked the face I looked upon. So looked itself on me. I offered it no help because the cause was mine, the misery a compact as hopeless as divine. Neither would be absolved, neither would be a queen. Without the other, therefore, we perish, though we reign. Now, think about the ways in which we're back to blindness and sight. We'll see this again in Poem 670 and 871, 662. We already saw it, you'll remember, in Poem 76. She'll begin with this like and then end with so. Like eyes that looked on wastes, incredulous of aught. This word incredulous, I think, is an important one to take us to the word misery, which is probably the key word of the poem. But blank. Now, of course, this incredulous of aught has led any number of readers to say that what Emily and Sue had was some kind of a physical relationship, lesbian relationship, which could not have been fulfilled during the time in which Sue and Emily were alive. In other words, it was not allowed, and therefore you ought not to be this way, depending on how you want to interpret this. Notice what we will say, though, about the eyes that look on each other's faces, that they're blank, and then there's this notion of a steady wilderness. When we get to poem 604, we're going to see this wilderness idea again. Unto my book so good to turn far ends of tired days, it half endears the abstinence and pain is missed in praise. As flavors cheer retarded guests with banquetings to be, so spices stimulate the time, till my small library, it may be wilderness without, far feet of failing men, but holiday excludes the night, and it is bells within. I think these kinsmen of the shelf, their countenances kid, enamor in perspective, and satisfy obtain. This idea that books can help to fill the wilderness here. Notice it's a steady wilderness diversified by night. In other words, we're looking at each other's faces. We can see nothing but night. Right? Infinites of naught. Will take us back, by the way, to poem 154 if you want to go back there. By the way, notice your rhyming of aught with naught. As far as it could see, the eyes, in other words, or the face. It's brilliant the way she'll substitute one for the other. So, again, notice, like, so. So looked the face I looked upon. Is this Sue? She's referencing. So looked itself on me. So you've got two lovers who are looking at each other's face, trying to get beyond the blank and the wilderness that exists there. And then, notice she'll say it, I offered it no help, reminding us of Walt Whitman's I sit and look out and say nothing, right? Because the cause was mine. In other words, I'm the one that started this relationship, so I can't say anything about it. The misery, key word I think in this poem, a compact as hopeless as divine. In other words, we have this amazing relationship, but we can do nothing with it. Anyone that's ever had a relationship that could not be reciprocated for any number of reasons. Maybe people in the family didn't agree. We immediately think of Romeo and Juliet as a classic example of this. And yet could sit and look and recognize and long for something that can never actually happen or transpire. The misery a compact as hopeless as divine. And then notice neither, right? Neither would be absolved. In other words, neither one would back away. Neither would be a queen. Now, when we get to poem 631, we're going to play with this idea of queen again. Ourselves were wed when summer, dear, your vision was in June, and when your little lifetime failed, I wearied too of mine, and overtaken in the dark where you had put me down by someone carrying a light, I too received the sign. 'Tis true, our future's different, Leah. Your cottage faced the sun, while oceans in the north must be on every side of mine. 'Tis true, your garden led the bloom, for mine in frost was sown. And yet one summer we were queens, but you were crowned in June. This idea, neither would be a queen, suggests neither one would rule, right, without the other. Therefore, and again, notice how it goes from like to so to therefore. Almost like the language of the legal profession that she grew up around because her father was a lawyer. Therefore, we, notice it goes from I to we perish though we reign. Now, this is not like poem 604 with its rejection. Notice we don't have any necessary rejection here. We just have an affirmation of what the relationship is to both of them. When we get to poem 642, we're going to play around with this same game again. We'll come back to this poem. Me from myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. Think about the divided self here, right? Me from myself to banish had I art, impregnable my fortress unto all heart. But since myself assault me, how have I peace except by subjugating consciousness? And since we're mutual monarch, notice here it's monarch, not queens, how this be except by abdication me of me? And again, notice the absolving and the abdication. Or when we get to poem 670, we're gonna hear it this way. One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Far safer of a midnight meaning external ghost than its interior comforting that cooler host. Far safer though an abbey gallop, the stones a chase, the unarmed one's a self encounter in lonesome place. Notice wilderness, lonesome place. Ourself behind ourself concealed should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment be horrors least. The body borrows a revolver. He bolts the door, or looking a superior specter more. And then finally, when we get at the end of our study, or closer to the end of our study at 12:19, she'll say it this way. Now I knew I lost her. Not that she was gone, but remoteness traveled on her face and tongue. Alien, though objourning as a foreign race, traversed she through pausing, latitudinous place. And then the poem will continue. It will come back to 458 when we get there. What are we going to do with this poem at 2a? I think our argument is that love is a difficult, a complicated emotion, right? It often can lead to misery. In other words, in love we can be both hopeful and helpless, right? That is to say, hopeless and divine, amazing and yet wretched, all at the same time. At 2b, the construction of like so, therefore, I think is important here. And the paradox, we perish though we reign. Well, yeah, we are together, but not together. We do have a relationship, but not a relationship. We are in love, but we can't express it in any profound way. So what's the point? At 3a, again, the divided self poems, I think we have to come back to study again, the 642, the 670, and the 1219 when we meet there. John Donne's The Ecstasy as well will come to mind with I-beams twisted. And I think that maybe there is some of John Donne in this very poem itself. Finally, in 3b, what was a time when you experienced this kind of complicated relationship? You very much wanted to be with someone. You very much knew they were complicit in wanting to be with you, and yet for any number of reasons, it could never happen other than in the moment eyes might meet. I hope Emily's challenging you to think about relationships. Thank you.